Hello and welcome to another episode. I am Brian, the Unskilled Commander, and this is a new episode of Possibilities, all Artifact Edition. So with Possibilities, I take 3 legendary creatures, decide whether they're worth building commander decks around, and just off the top of my head how I would go about starting those builds and what I would focus on as I did them. Basically a thought experiment just to try and get myself a little better at thinking about building commander decks. And also, it's a good opportunity for you guys to go into the comments and say, oh, I have that commander, it's great for this, or yeah, that's not a good card for any kind of commander, it's not worth it, or give cards that will put this in that deck and it might help make it what you want, things like that. So we can kind of work on it together and think, and maybe you guys would find a commander that you would want to build, even if I don't think it's worth it. So let's jump right in. First off, we've got Graz Unstoppable Juggernaut. Now, this is an 8-drop commander. It's a 7/5. Right off the bat, I probably would steer clear of it just because of the 8-drop. My Toxtrol deck that was a 7-drop never really worked right because it was too hard to get out quickly. It was, when it did get out, it got blown up or exiled once, and now it's, now this one would be 10 mana to recast. It's just too exponentially, well, not exponentially, but it's too much of an increase every time to make it viable for multiple plays, especially if you're going to build the deck around the commander. However, with this one, it's still an interesting concept. It's Juggernauts you control attack each combat if able. Juggernauts you control can't be blocked by walls, and other creatures you control have base power and toughness 5/3 and are Juggernauts in addition to their other creature types. Now, being a colorless artifact creature, that means you can't put any colored lands in the deck, and you can't put any colored spells in the deck. So this is another fun aspect of trying to build an artifact commander, simply because it really curtails your ability to expand into things like burn or ramp or anything. You have to work within colorless. Now there's a lot of good colorless lands that do really cool things that you tap this land and it gains you a life. You tap this land and it can untap a creature, whatever, all kinds of things like that. Plus there's wastes that are, that count as lands that tap for colorless, so you can easily get the mana base. And there are ways to get around the fact that there's no ramp, because if you put a ton of artifact mana rocks in there, that can also help. Good 10, 15, maybe even 20 in a deck like this. You would need to kind of focus on a lot of the very low cost mana rocks, like the super expensive ones, meaning, the Moxes and whatever, the things that come in for 0. But unfortunately, those are very expensive cards to buy. But those kind of things could help speed the deck up. Then, what I like about it, though, is that it makes everything a Juggernaut. So it doesn't matter what you play, it's a Juggernaut, and it's a 5/3 Juggernaut to start with. So I would actually probably focus on trying to get as many artifact flyers that are really, really low cost as I could, and just flood the board with, Ornithopter and, Pilgrim's Eye, and all those ones that can get you lands, because there's your ramp, and things like that. A bunch of the Myr tap for colorless mana, so you can get them in there to help, as mana dorks, as they're called. But yeah, I would focus on trying to get a lot of flyers that when Graz actually comes in, they're now 5/3 flyers instead of 1/2s, and they have to attack, but that's fine because this is going to be a combat deck. Clearly, it's going to be a combat deck. And then I would, of course, put all kinds of buffs down, so I would get, your Herald's Horns and your, Vanquisher's Banners and declaring Juggernauts so that they're getting the buffs and they cost less. There you go. And then I would also try and focus on every kind of artifact that, reduces costs of creatures. If there's a few, artifact manufacturer Foundry or Foundry Inspector. Foundry Inspector makes artifacts cost 1 less. So things like that. There's ways to try and lower Graz's cost and also buff up all of your little weenies that are now going to be 5/3s that have to attack. So it's an interesting concept. I don't know that I would follow through and try and build it, but it's fun, and plus the artwork looks really cool in that full art. So next up, we've got Memnarch. This is a classic commander. When I first started playing, Memnarch was really big, so it's not anything special to try and talk about this one. But that was when I first started, so I wasn't paying attention and I didn't know exactly how people used it. So again, this is a 7-drop, still really super expensive to get out. You would have to do the same things I've already talked about with the other commanders, with all the ones like Foundry Inspector, all the things that can lower the cost and or ramp in colorless to get Memnarch out faster. But with Memnarch, you do have access to blue, and so I would definitely focus on stalling out your opponents. The control side of blue, obviously, your counterspells, propaganda, things like that that can try and stop them. A lot of bounce spells that just put their stuff back in their hands or something to buy you time to get Memnarch out. And then any kind of creature or enchantment or anything that says reduces the activated ability cost of a permanent you control, because these are activated abilities, I believe. I hope, correct me if I'm wrong, but you pay 2 blue and 1 to target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. Pay 3 and a blue, gain control target artifact. So luckily you don't tap Memnarch to do any of those. So the best part is if you can get some of those things that lower activated ability costs and then get a lot of mana ramp out, which is extremely hard to do in both blue and colorless, but you have access to at least one more Myr with the blue, and so as many mana dorks as you can, a lot of the creatures that come in and say, go get a basic land or whatever, and that way you can activate the abilities, a bunch of them. So you turn everyone's creatures in, or just permanents, because it says target permanent, turn them into artifacts and then steal them. And it doesn't say till end of turn, doesn't say give them back, so they're yours. And something you could do is get like some of the altars out, Ashnod's altar and some of the other ones, so it's like, hey, pay 4, I gain control of your, even if it's just a soul ring. But, well, that has to be creatures. But it's like you turn something into a creature, their commander even, or just one of their big creatures or something that's bad, turn it into an artifact, immediately take it. You can swing with it if it's viable. If not, you immediately sack it to Ashnod's altar to get yourself back some more mana or gain life or whatever the altar does. And then they're down a creature and you get some resources back to try and cast something else. So that's how I would probably start to build Memnarch. I'm pretty sure that's like standard operating procedure for him. I'm not talking anything crazy or new directions, but again, like I said, I didn't know how to build Magic decks really well when it started, or when I started, and that was when he was a prime commander. And last but not least, Ramos Dragon Engine, which is a weird one because I've had a commander deck with him as the lead. It was my Planeswalker deck, but I think it didn't work out very well. I've since taken it apart, but I think with him, in a new direction, I would try and focus. So he's a 6-drop, a 4/4 flyer. So again, all of these are very hard to get onto the field quickly because they are such high mana cost. The good thing is because he has all 5 colors in him for his abilities, you can make a 5-color deck. Or you could stick to not. You could make a 1-color deck. Just make it a green artifact deck, whatever you want. But you have access to green, which means you get ramp. So that's important. So you can ramp up and get Ramos out quicker. And then I think I would focus on the actual counters this time as opposed to trying to use him to get 5 counters and to get double Wooburg, which is his ability. Sorry, it's whenever you cast a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Ramos for each color of that spell. So if it's a red-green spell, you get 2 counters. If it's just a green spell, you get 1 counter. Then you remove 5 +1/+1 counters from him, and you make double Wooburg, and activate this only once on each of your turns. So you can make 2 blue, 2 red, etc. I would focus more on the actual removal and placing of the counters, I think, on a redo of Ramos. There's a lot of really good creatures out now, and just anything, artifacts and stuff like that, enchantments even, that focus on moving counters around. And when you move counters, you double them, or when you move counters, you gain life or something like that. There's also a lot of creatures that say when you remove counters from them, deal damage to any target, meaning your opponents or other creatures or something like that. And so I would take advantage of that. So I would play a lot of spells, even if they're just 1-color spells. That's fine. Try and keep them low cost, like under 4 drops at best, or at worst, 2, 3 drops that are monocolors or maybe 2 colors or whatever. Drop them quickly, ramp up how many counters he has on him. And you can only do it once per turn, but then remove 5 counters, do something with that. Have something triggered where it's like when you remove counters, do X, Y, and Z, and really expand off of that into fun, interesting directions that might be a little tricky to maneuver through with the triggers, but I think it could be a fun aspect to take that deck in. So there you go. Those are just off the top of my head how I would probably start to build these decks if I were going to build them. Like I said, I don't know that I really would, because he has access to green and he is only a 6 out of the 3, 6, 7, and 8. I might consider trying to do what I just said for Amos at some point. Could be fun. I'm still actually like the Graz idea is still kind of fun as well. I just don't see it working well. I don't see it functioning and being any kind of threat to anybody. It could be a fun little, maybe even consider trying to make it into a popper deck, something like just cheap that you don't have to worry about it being competing with your high end meta. So that's an idea. But what do you think? Would you like to build any of these? Have you built them? If you have, what have you used? And if you think they're all crap, why do you think they're all crap? Why would you steer clear of them? Appreciate you watching. Please, subscribe if you haven't. Click some like buttons along the way. Really appreciate it. And I will see you next time.